Upon hearing that Zhang Yi was also having a miserable life, a hint of joy flashed in the eyes of the leaders of the 3 major bases. Although they were also miserable, as long as everyone was the same, they would be balanced. After all, as the saying goes, misery loves company. Zhang Yi was unsure if it was an illusion, but he felt a pair of eyes immediately glanced over his direction when he said this. However, Bian Junwu was wearing sunglasses, so his eyes could not be seen. Thus, he concluded that it might just be an illusion. Among the 5 major forces, the representative of the snow worship sect was the last to arrive. However, the person who came was not the leader Yuan Kongye, but the high priest Zhang Yi. No one felt anything strange about this. It was obvious that Yuan Kongye usually did not manage any affairs in the snow worship sect. After all, she was a young girl who had barely passed the age of 20, give or take. Yuan Kongye wasn't as good at management as the experienced Zhang Yi. So it was natural that Zhang Yi was the one who came to the meeting on behalf of the snow worship sect this time. Zhang Yi greeted Bian Junwu politely, and then found a seat to sit down. Seeing that all the invited guests had arrived, Bian Junwu silently rolled up his sleeves and looked at his watch. "Very good, no one is late," he said. His voice was very cold, devoid of any emotion, as if it came from an ice cave, which made everyone uneasy. He then put his arms heavily on the table. His gaze swept over everyone present. And with just one sentence, the expressions on everyone's faces became serious. The zombie crisis in Tianhai City has broken out. As the largest forces in Tianhai City, you guys have an unshakable responsibility. But upon seeing the look on your faces, it was obvious that you guys expected the envoy of Jiangnan district to come here to settle this crisis. You guys are thinking of pushing the responsibility on us right away. Do you know what the significance of establishing a shelter is? I will exempt the snow worship sect for the time being. They belong to a non-governmental organization, after all. But the 4 of you have either directly occupied an official shelter or inherited most of the resources of that shelter. And the significance of the existence of the shelter in each city is to maintain local stability when the city is in crisis. Bian Junwu roared, slamming his fist directly on the table without any reservation. The sneer at the corners of his mouth became stronger. You guys occupy the most advantageous resources, but are unwilling to bear the responsibilities of protecting the city's stability. What else can this be but incompetence? Xiao Honglian remained silent, her arms crossed. She was unable to refute Bian Junwu's words, because she naturally understood the significance of the existence of a shelter, which was to allow more people to survive. But Wei Dinghai, on the other hand, didn't. So with a look of concern, he said, "Mr. Bian, these words are light, easy to say. Why wouldn't we want to maintain the stability of Tianhai City? But the scale of this zombie tide is too large. It appeared suddenly, and there are already countless zombies everywhere, causing chaos. Relying solely on the power in our hands, there was no way to solve this crisis. After all, we are not like the Jiangnan district, which has a large number of powerful weapons, and the most elite legions in the country." Who knew that after Wei Dinghai finished speaking, a smile which had involuntarily crept on Bian Junwu's lips would become obvious and blatant. Then, he crossed his arms and lay back in his chair, laughing unscrupulously like a madman. Then, he restrained his smile. His tone, again, became colder. "Since you don't have the ability to deal with this crisis, from now on, just obey my orders. I will take on the commanding task of this zombie crisis. And all your forces must obey my orders unconditionally." The faces of everyone present suddenly changed, but it was mostly a look of shock. However, Zhang Yi's face sharpens with a look of defiance. "Asking me to obey other people's orders unconditionally? Impossible." Even if the other party was the Jiangnan district, Zhang Yi couldn't accept it. Because being mobilized by others, there was a possibility of being sacrificed. Zhang Yi was the first to speak up. "We may not be able to accept this," Xing Tian also added. "Even if the Jiangnan region is at the top, a few of you want to command all of us, you are underestimating us." Then Xiao Honglian finally cut in. "It's only possible unless you send a large force." Everyone spoke one after another, and it was the same issue. They could not accept their power being taken away from them by others. What's more, it was just a small team that didn't know the depth. If a large force came, they would have endured it. Bian Junwu sneered and said, "Oh? You mean you think I don't have the qualifications, right?" Xiao Honglian snorted coldly. Although the others didn't say anything, the meaning in their eyes was very clear. "And even though your team might be strong, you are not qualified to be the commander-in-chief of us." So, after a brief moment, Bian Junwu said, "Then, can you guys solve this crisis with your own strength?" Hearing the question, everyone was silent for a while. After all, no one really knew how large the zombie tide and rat swarm were. Bien Junwoo sneered. You guys don't have the ability to protect Tianhai City, and had also caused the zombies to spread to the surrounding cities, affecting the residents of other cities. You've become greedy for the insignificant power in your hands and are reluctant to let go. But don't forget, Bien Junwoo slammed the table heavily, alerting everyone. Tianhai City is not your property. Huagua is still there, and so is Jiangnan, the region with the highest power command center in the Jiangnan area, Bien Junwoo said as he stood up from his chair. And although he was thin, he was unusually tall and had a mighty presence. There was also a fierce military aura on him, a feeling that Zhang Yi and the others only felt on a military commander in the past. You know, the world before all the ice and snow. Bien Junwoo folded his arms and looked down at everyone and said, I come here on behalf of the Jiangnan region, and what I say is the will of the Jiangnan region. If you are unwilling to obey my orders, then the consequences are not something you can bear. Zhang Yi frowned and said nothing. His forces only had a few people, so even if he handed over the so-called command, the loss would be minimal. Unlike the other major forces which had a large population and resources. But even so, Zhang Yi was unwilling to lose all initiative, because it would obviously put him and the people around him in danger. Xiao Honglian sneered. If we don't obey, are you going to send troops to destroy us? She questioned. Xiao Honglian knew all too well of the military might of Jiangnan region, so she was naturally afraid. But the reason for their current meeting was for negotiation, and she had to be brave enough to fight for her own interests. After all, power is something that, once given away, it would be difficult to take it back. Xiao Honglian and a few others were worried that if they gave up their power, they would become vassals of the Jiangnan region in the future and lose their autonomy. Bien Junwoo pointed his sunglasses in the direction of Xiao Honglian and stared at her quietly for a few seconds before she continued in a cold tone. Are you trying to scare me? To scare us? Bien Junwoo opened his lips and said slowly, do you think the current situation is not serious enough? Do you think this incident only concerns your Tianhai City? To tell you the truth, when we came to investigate this time, we were given two orders. The first was to try to solve the zombie crisis with local forces as much as possible, and not allow the situation to worsen and spread to other cities. The second was once it was found that things are out of control and there is no way to solve the zombie problem through manpower, then Bien Junwoo stopped talking and then slowly sat back in his chair. The entire Tianhai City must be abandoned. His last statement was cold, but also carried a huge sense of responsibility. Also, it was not as cold-hearted as that of the leaders of the five forces present. Is that really the case? Zhang Yi couldn't help swallowing his saliva. His eyes were extremely serious. He had considered such a situation. Once the situation in Tianhai City gets out of control, and the threat starts to spread to all the surrounding cities, then Tianhai City will undoubtedly outweigh its value. Therefore, abandoning it, which in turn would stop the losses in time in Jiangnan region's eyes, was an expected choice. Just like when abscesses appeared in the human body, if there was no way to cure them with medicine, they could only be removed by surgery. In this case, Bien Junwoo and his investigation team was actually equivalent to medicine. But once the medicine fails, the next surgery would be... Zhang Yi took a moment to finish his thoughts. He knew well what the implication meant. If it comes down to it, the entire Tianhai City would cease to exist. Zhang Yi absolutely did not want to face such consequences. The others also understood what Bien Junwoo meant. For a time, everyone fell silent. Even Xiao Honglian, who had a hot temper, could not refute it. The Jiangnan district can destroy them with just a press of a button. Bien Junwoo was very satisfied with the reaction of everyone present. So he coldly continued. As of now, the armed forces of all the local forces in Tianhai City must unconditionally obey my command. Xiao Honglian, Wei Dinghai and Xing Tian were doubtful, but they really did not have the qualifications to challenge the Jiangnan district at the moment. But at this time, Zhang Yi slowly spoke. I am willing to support your actions. But as you said, the reason why the investigation team came here was because the local forces have no way to solve the crisis of zombies and rats. So you have to intervene and command them. But what if we could solve the problem within our sphere of influence ourselves? Zhang Yi had a playful smile on his face. And as soon as he said this, everyone in the conference room looked at him. Zhang Yi, what do you mean by this? Don't tell me that the few people in your shelter can solve such a large number of zombies and rats. Xiao Honglian asked with a sneer, without a trace of belief on her face. Wei Dinghai also leaned back in his chair and said sarcastically, Sure enough, heroes come out of youth. Zhang Yi, you are very capable, but this matter is of great importance. Don't let your momentary selfishness cause everyone to suffer with you. Hearing this, Zhang Yi's smile became even stronger. So with his clasped hands leisurely under his chin, he lazily said, "Do you think I am kidding you? No, I am really sorry. In fact, when it comes to the area surrounding my shelter, the zombie and the mutant giant rat problem have been solved." Everyone's face was full of astonishment when they heard this. It was not a child's play, but Zhang Yi said it with a solemn oath and not like a joke. If what Zhang Yi said was true, then doesn't it mean that while the rest were fighting desperately with the zombies and mutated rats, Zhang Yi has been watching the show leisurely? The faces of the leaders of the 4 major forces were uglier than eating shit. "I don't believe it. How did you guys do it?" Xiao Honglian slams the table, shouting at Zhang Yi through her gritted teeth. She just couldn't come to terms with the fact that Zhang Yi was telling the truth. How she wished to hear from Zhang Yi that he was just joking around. And actually, he suffered heavy losses also. But if Zhang Yi hadn't, then how can he live so freely? Bian Junwu also looked at Zhang Yi with curiosity. Zhang Yi had a calm smile on his face when he replied, "What I said was true. If you don't believe it, you can go and investigate it yourself." Bian Junwu asked, "How did you do it? I'm very curious about this." Everyone stared at Zhang Yi impatiently, and although they were angry, they urgently needed a way to solve the problem of the zombies and rats. It would be great if they could learn from Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi put away his smile and crossed his arms. And in a deep voice, he said lightly, "Actually, what happened was quite simple. The zombies feed on humans, so they will gather in places where there are many people. And where are the most people in Tianhai City? It's undoubtedly where you guys gather." Sighing heavily, he turned his head from side to side, taking a good look at everyone and continued, "My shelter has the least people, less than 10 in total. In addition, the place is relatively remote and located in the suburbs, so it doesn't attract many zombies." Zhang Yi then frowns slightly as he recalls his encounters. But even so, the battle with them is extremely brutal. After a long period of contact, I found that there is a corpse king commanding them. This corpse king had wisdom and can create new zombies. Therefore, only by killing it can a zombie nest be completely destroyed. But we later found out that the giant rats and zombies had a symbiotic relationship. Once the zombie horde was destroyed, the giant rats will lose their target and will not actively attack humans. So we ventured into the underground tunnel. We used all the weapons we got from West Mountain Base. Zhang Yi lied by omitting important details of the matter, but most of what he said was true. He just deliberately concealed the real method of solving the zombie swarm. The reason for his actions were the questions which would undoubtedly arise if he had told the whole truth. Like, how did you manage to drown the tunnel with seawater? And you seems to be incredibly lucky to find all the necessary materials for your plan at West Mountain Base. All these questions was a direct link to what his power really entails. And in the entire Tianhai City, he was the only one with such an ability. The only one who had a huge alternate space that could draw a large amount of seawater from the East China Sea to flood the subway tunnel. Once he reveals his method, Zhang Yi was afraid that the other organizations, including the envoy from the Jiangnan region, Bian Junwu, would put pressure on him and demand more of his help to solve the zombie problem, regardless of whether his plan would work or not. Zhang Yi did not want to sound like an expert in the field of this zombie crisis. After all, he knew that freezing the subway would not completely solve the zombie problem. After listening to Zhang Yi's explanation, everyone felt a bit uneasy. Indeed, Xishan District and Lujiang District are relatively remote, especially the shelter where Zhang Yi lives, which was close to the countryside. And at present, he was also maintaining the status quo of these two districts. Bian Junwu stared at Zhang Yi with a strange look, as if seeing his resourcefulness for the first time. Zhang Yi continued, "According to what you said, if our local forces can maintain the stability of their local area, can we give them a certain degree of freedom? Of course, we are very happy to cooperate with the investigation team. If you need our help, just ask. As long as we can do it, we will never hide our secrets. However, at this stage, we still hope to focus more on our own sphere of influence. After all, everyone knows that I have the least number of people, and it is really difficult to allocate personal troops to act in other places." Zhang Yi said this in neither a humble nor arrogant manner. This was to save face for Bian Junwu, as if to say, if your Jiangnan district investigation team needs help, we will be glad to assist you. But remember that it wasn't me who asked, but you were the one who came to ask for my help. Bian Junwu stared at Zhang Yi for a long time before he replied in a deep voice, "You have done a good job, which also shows that your team has extraordinary wisdom and strength. We will need your strength in our subsequent actions." Hearing this, Zhang Yi just smiled delightfully and said to Bian Junwu, "If necessary, please feel free to ask." Again, Zhang Yi did not show any trace of unwillingness and maintained his usual bright smile, offering his full support. After all, he still had to give face to the Jiangnan region. Also, this previous actions would prove his proficiency among the rest and make him some sort of a necessary existence in Tianhai City. Bian Junwu nodded when he heard Zhang Yi's answer, so he thanked him in advance. Immediately after, he loudly said to everyone present, "Well, from now on, I need you to cooperate with our actions unconditionally." Bian Junwu put his hands on the table and continued in the same tone. "Just share all the information you have in your hands first. In addition, at this time, no matter what kind of grudges you have had before, you must let it go first. Even if you want to fight, you have to wait until the current problem is solved."